Welcome to Sensual Sequence Contents, home of romance and sensual life stories received and shared. While my husband was drunk, my stepson and I shared a moment that still leaves me questioning and reminiscing everything. Every time I think about that night, I can't decide if it was a mistake or something to remember. Let me take you back to where it all began. The evening started like so many others, as my husband Adams had returned from one of his long trips earlier that day. He barely touched his dinner. After pouring himself a drink and settling into his usual spot on the couch, I busied myself in the kitchen scrubbing plates while my mind wandered. Adam's presence was familiar but provided little comfort. He was there yet absent. Laughter filtered in from the living room, but it felt hollow, more habitual than genuine. I sighed softly, setting the plate aside and gazing out at the night sky when I heard footsteps behind me. Turning, I saw Marshall, my 21-year-old stepson, standing in the doorway. His tousled hair and cautious expression caught my attention. "Hey," he said softly to avoid waking his father. "Everything okay?" I asked, offering a small smile. "Yeah," he replied, stepping further into the room. "Dad's had a few already, huh?" I nodded knowingly. "You could say that," Marshall sighed, leaning against the counter. "You've been doing everything around here, haven't you? You should rest." "I'm fine," I said, brushing off his concern. His eyes lingered on mine for a moment, and then Adam's slurred voice called out from the living room, "Bree, bring me another drink." Marshall's jaw tightened, his frustration evident. I touched his arm reassuringly. "I've got it," I said softly, pouring Adam's favorite whiskey into a glass and taking it to him. He barely noticed me before turning back to the TV. Returning to the kitchen, I found Marshall still standing there, visibly more relaxed. "He'll probably fall asleep soon," I said lightly. "He usually does," Marshall replied, smirking. We shared a quiet laugh, the laugh easing the tension for a moment, but as silence settled I felt his gaze, intense and unflinching, and it made my pulse quicken. "Bridget," he began, but Adam's snores interrupted him. We froze, then laughed nervously. "That didn't take long," Marshall said, shaking his head. The room suddenly felt smaller. I turned to rearrange a dish towel, trying to distract myself, but his presence was impossible to ignore. "You don't have to do everything alone," he said softly. "I manage," I replied, though the words felt hollow. He stepped closer, his voice earnest. "You deserve more than this," he said. The warmth in his eyes made my chest tighten. Before I could respond, he brushed his hands lightly against mine. The touch was electric, sending a jolt through me. I stepped back, shaken. "We should get some sleep," I said, my voice trembling. "Yeah," he agreed, his gaze lingering before he left the room. That night, I laid awake, my mind racing with thoughts of Marshall, his words, his touch, the intensity in his eyes. They played over and over in my head. Eventually I gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen for water. As I stood there sipping from a glass, I heard soft footsteps. Turning, I saw Marshall in the doorway, his expression hesitant. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Me neither," I replied. He stepped closer, leaning against the counter. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I don't know, honestly. I have a lot on my mind," I said. "Me too," he said, his voice quieter. Then he looked at me and said something that left me breathless. "It's because of you." I froze, unsure of how to respond. "Marshall," I began, but he interrupted. "I've been thinking about you," he said, his tone steady. "I know it's wrong, but I can't help it." I tried to reason with him. "You're just confused with your dad gone so often. It's natural to feel close." "It's more than that. I felt this way for a while," he said. His honesty left me speechless. The boundaries we were skirting were clear, but for the first time in years I felt truly seen. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine again, and I couldn't ignore the connection between us. "This is complicated," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I know," he said softly, "but it feels right." Before I could stop it, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine, and a tentative kiss. My breath hitched, and for a moment I froze. Then, without thinking, I kissed him back. The kiss deepened, and the world seemed to fade away. It was reckless, dangerous, and yet in that moment it felt like the only thing that made sense. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless. "This can't happen again," I said, my voice shaking. "I know," he replied, but the conviction in his voice was weak. "But it already has." The following days were blur. Marshall and I avoided being alone together, but the tension was palpable. Adams remained oblivious, wrapped up in his routine. I tried to focus on keeping things normal, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that night. One evening Marshall approached me in the kitchen. "I think I need to spend some time at my mom's," he said quietly. I nodded, though the thought of him leaving made my chest ache. "When are you going?" "Tomorrow," he said. "I've already talked to Dad." The next morning Marshall packed his things and left. Watching his car disappear down the street, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. We had done the right thing by putting distance between us, but the pain of letting go was sharper than I had anticipated. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal. Marshall and I exchanged polite texts, but the intimacy we'd shared was gone. I focused on repairing my marriage, though the cracks were still there. The memory of that night lingered, a constant reminder of the line we'd crossed. One afternoon I received a message from Marshall. "I hope you're doing okay." I stared at the screen, unsure of how to respond. Finally I typed, "I'm fine, I hope you're well too." The conversation ended there, but it left me with a sense of finality. We had both moved on, but the experience had changed me. It made me confront the loneliness I'd buried for so long and forced me to reevaluate what I wanted from my life and my relationships as it is here. Now, reflecting on everything that happened, I still don't know what to think. Was it a mistake, or was it a moment of clarity? Perhaps it was both. Have you ever faced a decision where your heart and mind were at war? Let me know your thoughts. Your perspective might help her find the clarity she's searching for. Thank you. She will be reading from the comment section. Hi guys. If you love romantic and intimate scenes that make your heart race, then you're in the right place. Here on Sensual Sequence, we bring you the most captivating moments filled with passion, chemistry, and pure emotion. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Let's build a community that appreciates the art of love and connection. Subscribe now and let's dive into the world of romance together.